He is the executive producer and executive vice president of Mandalay Sports Media, and he is one of the producers of the Last Dance documentary. We welcome Jon Weinbach onto Hoopsology. How's it going, Jon?
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on the show. We've been really looking forward to this chat. Just some background. We'll bore you for a couple of minutes. Matt and I pretty much relaunched our podcast because of the Last Dance documentary. It kind of brought us back together. We've been childhood friends, huge fan of the Jordan era, and this doc was just such an incredible feat. So I just want to thank you and everybody that worked on it, because it's a really incredible piece of just, I know it sounds kind of corny, Americana. Honestly, I don't know what we could have done without that documentary in the pandemic. So I just want to personally, I'm sure Matt feels the same way, just thanking you for the piece of work. It was just really incredible to watch.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's obviously a career sort of changing or defining project. It was a huge team effort. Starting with my partner Mike Tolan with Mandalay Sports Media. Sort of getting our arms around this project, obviously the NBA and the Jordan folks, but director Jason Hare, an incredible production team, great editors, and it's really what can you say? It's still sort of stunning, frankly, even a year later, and I can't believe it's a year later. But it's very, very rare in any walk of life. Forget about just entertainment or sports, that you have anything that sort of pops the zeitgeist like that. And I'm biased. I love the shows. I had the privilege of obviously being involved with it for 4 years. From the very first deck we did, and I thought it was going to be good and memorable. I had no way of, I don't think any of us had any way of predicting that A, it would land when it did, B, it would have the impact that it did. And it's very humbling and gratifying, but thank you guys.
So, Jon, can you reflect on just the feelings and feedback after the documentary came out? Because there's a lot of media attention over each episode when it aired, and then once it concluded, every single sports show was covering. But since then, life has somewhat gotten back to normal. But for you yourself, what feelings have you had just since the documentary has been released? Have you gotten any additional feedback from other people that might have missed it during there was no sports and just might have caught it on Netflix a few months later? What has it been basically since the documentary has been released? Is that year since? Any thoughts with that?
Well, I mean, it's obviously been incredible, the reception. I mean, how many, you should be so lucky to, like I said, to do anything in life where people are thanking you for what you do. So, I think the part, it's still, honestly, it's surreal, the way it was rolled out. And look, I think we got rewarded in obviously huge ways for our hustle. The story's been told a lot about, look, originally the series was going to come out in like November of 2019, and for various reasons it went later, and then it was to June, and then obviously when the pandemic hit, that the crazy part of it was, this is how not finished we were. I mean, the show was 7 episodes were pretty much done, 8 episodes when the first one aired, but I can tell you episode 9 and 10 were not done. I mean, no, and episode 10 really wasn't done, but it was March 12th, whatever it was. So Jason Hare, fabulous director, had done all the interviews pretty much, maybe save for 1 or 2. And the one person we had not interviewed was John Stockton. And if you remember, the early pandemic in the United States was all in the state of Washington. And John Stockton lived in Spokane. So I was in LA, we're based in Los Angeles. And, Jason, Mike, they said, listen, Jason there's too much of a risk. If he goes to Washington, can't fly back, we'll be stuck. And so you go to Washington, you'll do the interview with Stockton. So then I made arrangements, the whole thing. And then I asked, the real arbiter of all things in my life, my wife, if I should go. And she's like, are you blankety blank crazy? You're going to go into the epicenter of the pandemic? No. So we ended up scrambling and getting a producer from Seattle. But that's how hectic it was. And that was March 12th. So we were on the air basically a month later, and so the decision was made Obviously in retrospect, a genius decision to not only come out earlier, but also this rhythm of 2 a week over 5 weeks. I mean, there was a thought of, hey, do we drop them all at once, and do we do 1 a week for 10 weeks? I think the cadence was perfect. And you asked about the response. I mean, it was so crazy because at that specific moment, right? Because maybe 2 months later, all the sports came back. But at that specific moment, not only was there no sports, there was no nothing. So every show covered each episode. SportsCenter covered each episode like it was Game 7 of the NBA Finals. So, look, that is something legitimately no one can ever probably replicate. And we obviously benefited from that. I still think, the show would have been memorable and the show was, extraordinarily well done. But, that's something that I think all of us are sort of, we acknowledge. And it's just so surreal that we were caught up in that vortex, and it ended up obviously being great.
Go ahead, Matt.
Jon, I wanted to ask, and I know this may be an extremely complicated question. In fact, I think it is. So if you can answer simply or in layman's terms for someone ignorant about movie producing like myself, I've heard producers being compared to like sports GMs. Can you describe like kind of your role in this project overall? And some of those moving pieces and how that compared like with The Last Dance compared to other projects.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. I come from a reporting background. I was a reporter. I used to be a reporter with the Wall Street Journal. And so I'm used to just like doing, right? It's all on me. Like I got to get the interview. I got to, arrange it. Production is more of a team effort, but the easiest way to describe what does a producer do? Producer gets to yes. Right. So whatever that means, you got to get to yes. You got to get it done. So in this one, we had a lot of, entities, a lot of stakeholders. You have the NBA that put in the work 20 years ago, from literally, Adam Silver, who was the one who really made the project, and Andy Thompson, who was the, producer in the ground, and Greg Winnick was the executive producer of NBA Entertainment. You have all these people at the NBA. And then obviously you have the Michael Jordan folks. And then you have, SD Portnoy, Curtis Polk. These are people who've been with Michael a long time, and then you have, obviously our team with Mandalay. Then you have our production team. Jason had done 30 for 30s, his team, and it should not go without notice. Jake Rogal, Matt Max, and Nina Kristich, like just the best, right? And then we had these editors. And then we had, Chad Beck and Devin Concannon. These are great, all people. So where do I fit in on that? It depended at various stages of the project, right? So in some cases, it was trying to get interviews. In other cases, it was like, okay, we want to get this piece of music, and we got to work with this label and that thing. And what are we going to do for what music are we going to put in for like when the Bulls go to Paris in episode 1? Like, should that be French hip hop or should it be American hip hop? And then in other instances, it was like literally calling Warner Brothers to get permission to use photos that were taken backstage during Space Jam. And then, so it's really a mix of organizational, creative, logistics, financial. It just depended on the thing. I mean, look, by nature, was a creator, like I've directed films, I've, been in that chair. And so those are obviously the most fun things is like, for me, probably most memorable was the interview actually with Steve Kerr, which we did in New York, which was just, he's a really special guy, and the interview was really fantastic. And so, the crew was quite small for a lot of these interviews, so it wasn't like there were 50 people at all the interviews, quite the opposite. So that one was really special. So, I mean, if that helps answer your question, it just depends on the show. Like I'm directing a documentary now, in which case I'm acting more like the director in the case, but I'm doing producing too. So I arrange the interviews. I tend to be pretty hands-on.
Awesome. Go ahead, Justin.
I hope that helps.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating.
It's a lot easier. It's funny because I used to be a reporter. It's like when I transitioned into production, my parents would ask the same thing. Like, well, what do you do? Like, what does a producer do? And it really just depends on the project and the specific other members of the team. I mean, this was, as you might imagine, a pretty big one. But actually, relatively speaking, there are a lot of stakeholders, a lot of different people involved, but the actual crew wasn't that large.
What challenges or excuse me, what feedback did you get that you didn't expect, that you were like, I didn't necessarily think I would get that type of feedback when the documentary came out? Because usually it's very polarizing. The Bulls are such a beloved team, but was there any type of feedback that you got from an unexpected source that kind of made you think, not in like a negative way, but just—
No, I know what you're saying. I mean, I think the, all cards on the table. Look, I grew up in LA. I was a massive Laker fan. I did not like the Bulls. I did not hate the Bulls to the degree I hated the Pistons and the Celtics. We had that in common. Bulls fans and Laker fans both hated those two entities. Whereas I think there's a couple things. I think people respond, it elicits a response. The intensity of Michael Jordan, the inability to let things go, and the candor. Michael came to play, in the most basic way with the film, and that obviously, it's one of these things where everybody feels they know Michael Jordan in some way because you've worn his shoes or whatever. But he had not been that vocal and that present as a voice in a long time, and so I think that what surprised me, I guess, was the degree to which it sort of popped the zeitgeist globally at the same time. And that's, partly a function of Netflix and the pandemic. And I think the gratitude people have about just having something that was well done, brought them back to a nostalgic time. And I think there's, look, I'm 44, there's a nostalgia among people my age who now we have kids about that time when we were in college, or for people who were a little bit younger when they were in high school, so we're all sort of we're now at the age that our parents were in the 80s, and when there was all the the 60s nostalgia. So there's an enormous amount of 90s nostalgia now. And so I think all of those factors, and layered on top of it, this insanity of the pandemic, combined to make this really, really unique. That Absolutely. I think is, that's just the thing I got, is how moved people were.
Awesome. Jon, I'm curious, you mentioned the interview with Steve Kerr being kind of one of your favorite interviews of the documentary. Did you have anything else in the documentary, any particular point? I mean, you mentioned it's a fantastic project, and I agree there are so many high points in it. Did you personally have a point in that documentary that was your favorite to see?
Ooh, tough question. So I generally say it's picking your kids or whatever. I think episode 7 is my favorite. I love episode 1. I love the Phil episode. I think episode 7 is the strongest. I mean, they're all strong. I think it's it hits all the hot buttons. Gambling, Michael's father's death, his retirement, the first retirement, and obviously I think it also has this incredible sort of emotional build to the end, and it's that moment when Michael gets emotional and Jason asked him about the sense that people didn't like him, and he says, I'm going to paraphrase, but I never asked anyone to do anything I wasn't willing to do. And he basically gets right on the cusp of tears, and that was in hour 1 of interview day 1. And look, I love the device of when we showed him the iPad, and that's kind of a funny one too, because
Absolutely.
obviously we didn't start with that, it just became this device, and it's something that I think a lot of people have done in some way, shape, or form just to sort of jog people's memory. Hey, look at this, but it worked to really incredible effect, and that was something again from the first cut of the first episode. First rough cut, when that was in, it was that's going to be really memorable, and that's people are going to, and Isaiah, he's not going to tell me he's not still an asshole. It's genius. And I think when you have icons like that letting their guard down, it's gold, and there's not many people like Michael Jordan. And so, I think whatever he would have said would have been newsworthy, but that he said it the way he did, and that he was clearly emotional about it, is great. I would say episode 7 is the one that I think kind of resonates or is most powerful, and I love episode 9. That's the what's the first half? This is terrible, but it's the one with Kerr as well. It's sort of the 97 season, and then Kerr, and And top of episode 10 is great with Reggie Miller. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff.
Absolutely. And I think, to your point, I think the iPad passing, I think that'll be a device in documentaries moving forward too, just because of getting that instant reaction from Jordan was just incredible.
Well, I'll tell you, as someone like I'm a student of history, I wouldn't say a concern. There was concern, while we were making it, because you have these parallel storylines, right? We keep coming back to the 97, 98 season, but there's we go back to, an episode on Scottie Pippen or Phil Jackson or, Dennis Rodman. And I think that was one thing I was pleasantly surprised that people were able to follow, even if they couldn't maybe necessarily know. Because there's one point in the film where, like, when we're with Rodman, and you see Rodman on the Pistons, and then you see him on the Spurs, and then he's on the Bulls, and I worried, oh my God, like people might, do that. And pleasantly, I mean, it was never confusing to me, but I'm a 1%er of NBA geekery, so like that way it's easy. But it was really gratifying that, like, guess what? Like, if you tell the story and you give some cues, like, people will follow. It's not that hard. And so that was really gratifying, sort of from the producerial point of view, that like that was a win for us.
What aspects of the documentary would you change if you can go back in time? If you had more time, if everything was like perfect scenario, what aspects would you change? I don't
know that I would change anything. I think that if anything, it would be adding. I mean, look, you could do another. We could have done, I think that it was probably in the neighborhood of like 18 minutes, maybe not even that much on Phil Jackson. We could have done more on Phil Jackson. We could have, in a perfect world, look, we would have loved to spend sort of current day time with Michael Jordan, in his current role as owner of the Hornets, see what lessons have been learned and that kind of thing. But, this was it was all about anchoring it in that time and then looking backward, it's not about now. And so I think that, if you'd asked me, if I could do anything, yes, we could have probably done 12 episodes, but I think, it will always be special because of the subject matter, when it landed, and obviously the reception.
Given the success that this documentary had, and that we know there's tons of footage from that season, could you see like a future like Last Dance 2 being made or anything like that? And if it's top secret, I understand.
No, I'll tell you, the reality is like, there was a lot of footage and it was shot on film. The reality is look, they sort of got more footage as the season went along. The answer is no. There's not going to be a second one. But the NBA had to sort of work out their rhythm with shooting. So there was a lot of hours, and there's obviously some incredible material that the NBA entertainment guys were great captured. But there's also a lot of, getting off on the tarmac in Indianapolis in February. You know what I mean? So like because they were working out themselves, the rhythm of access, and remember, they were not using iPhones and DSLRs. They were using bigger cameras with and sound guys with stuff. So it was a harder thing to do, and so I mean, I don't think there would be more. I think it's also, remember the time, and people weren't around with cameras on everybody's phone, so I think everybody was a little less sort of like, aware of the camera as much. They weren't playing to it as much. I mean, they were also a little bit, it was a bigger, more, it was just a bigger deal to deal with, to have a crew in your face. But at the same time, I think the culture has changed, and now people are just more used to it. So there's a little less novelty. And also there's something about the film. I mean, if you grew up in the 90s, or if you grew up even in the early 2000s, like your whole way of consuming Michael Jordan was in a 4:3 television screen, and this was on film, and it felt more cinematic. So, that was actually one of the real joys for me, is because the whole time of production, we're looking at sort of quote down-resed footage. It's got a big watermark on it, and it doesn't look like that. And so it was so cool that when we saw it and I saw it on TV, I would see it in the later episodes, because we just didn't have time, they were already high-resing it early, but it was really cool in the early episodes to see it like the way it was meant to be seen, which is really cool.
Jon, thank you very much for joining the show. Please let our listeners and viewers know where they can find you on social media, and also what else you're up to this year.
Oh, lots. There's a couple projects I'm not at liberty to discuss. One is basketball related. One is baseball related. Another one is X Games related. And I hate being that guy, but I can't. But we're lucky. We've been very busy. Mandalay Sports Media. What's my Twitter? I'm at JB Weinbach. And listen, I'd love to come back. I'm sorry I had to rush, but thanks for having me on. Happy to talk anytime.
Such a pleasure, Jon. Thank you so much.
This was incredible. We will definitely have you back. We have tons of more questions.
Wait, I see Lobos. Is it New Mexico in the house?
Yes, we're both born and raised Albuquerque, New Mexico. Yep.
So you must have. I mean, obviously, you're Luke Longley fans.
Yes.
Yes.
We have tons of questions about that. We'll save that for next interview.
Nice. Was it also Michael Cooper, University of New Mexico?
Correct.
Yes. Oh, looks like we lost Jon.
But
what a great time talking to him. And thank you again for Jon for joining us.
For sure. What a great chat it was with him.